Sioux Indians.
Sioux art. A long time ago, the Sioux tribe made beautiful art. Art was an important part of their lives. Women wore beaded dresses. They painted teepees, ropes, and shields. Warriors painted their bodies and horses before going to the war. Sometimes women made decorations with porcupine quills and beads. They also used shells and eagle feathers. The Sioux tribe made really beautiful star quilts. The star quilts are patchwork quilts. Each piece represented a person, not a particular person, just a person. Every piece of the patchwork was different. Every piece of the patchwork was necessary to make a whole quilt. To Sioux, star quilts represented a community of individuals who must work together to make a whole. Friendship was thread that held this quilt together. The Sioux were really proud of their quilts. They used their star quilts as blankets or gifts on special occasions. Each tribe has their own art. Some paintings were only made by men who kept the history of the tribe. Sioux didn't write their own language down. Instead, they painted little pictures on rawhide. Each small picture stood for an important event in the life of the tribe. This was called a winter count because it was painted every year. They used winter count to retell the important events. Through retelling, their history was remembered. It was the way the old people passed their memories to and traditions to young people. The Sioux were known for their beautiful beadwork on their clothing. They also were known for the doll-making method. Sioux art represents the Sioux people culture, beliefs, and even visions and dreams. That's why art is so important to Sioux.
Sioux clothing. Most of the Sioux's clothing was made from animal skins, buffalo, deer, and antelope. These animals were also their main food source. All the Sioux Indians wore on their feet were moccasins. In the cold winter, they wore warm snowshoes when they hunted buffalo. A warrior would wear an eagle feather bonnet. The number of feathers on a war bonnet represented the number of his very brave acts. Sioux men usually wore the animal skin they got when they went hunting and wore leggings too. On warm days, Sioux men only wore a loincloth and a belt. The Sioux women usually wore dresses made out of the deer skin that the Sioux men hunted. Sioux boys wore nothing until they reached the age of 10. They would begin wearing a breechclout. A breechclout is a deer skin stretched between a person's legs and fastened by a belt. Little Sioux boys often wore leggings and loincloths like the Sioux men.
Sioux customs. The Sioux did dances and had ceremonies all revolving around nature. They had nature spirits and nature dances. Everything was about nature and earth. The Sioux were also called the Dakota Indians. When a Sioux child was born, the parents of the child chose another couple to be the child's second parent. They did this because the second parents would teach the child a special gift that the regular parents didn't have. The second parents spent as much time with the child as the real parents. The first lesson a child would learn was not to cry out loud. If they made a crying noise, their parents would hold their nose and cover their mouth with their hand. The child did not like this, so they wouldn't cry out loud. They did not want the child to cry out loud because if they were hiding from enemies and the child started to cry, it would give their hiding spot away. When Sioux boys turned 12, they would have a dream about the talent that they would have. They would go out in the woods for 4 days. They would not eat, sleep, or drink while they were there. All they would do was pray. When they got back to their village, they would have their talent. The Sioux did a dance called the Sun Dance. There was a circle of teepees with a pole in the middle. On the pole there were leather ropes. The ropes were tied to sticks which they stuck in their backs. They danced, gazing at the sun. The Sioux believed strongly in nature. They did dances and even made sacrifices to please the nature spirits. They never hunted white buffalo because it was said that they were special and good luck. Spirituality was a big part of Sioux life. Famous Sioux Native Americans. Sitting Bull was a chief of the Sioux tribe. He was one of the many chiefs who fought for their land when the French settlers made them go further west into the plains. The Sioux, along with a few other tribes, did not like this. They fought until the French settlers agreed that the Black Hills could be for the Sioux. It went on peacefully for a long time, but then things changed. When people found that there was gold in the Black Hills, Europeans didn't want to stick with the agreement. People started swarming the Black Hills like bees. War came. Sitting Bull and others, including Red Cloud, fought with power and braveness. Things started taking a turn for the worst. Sitting Bull, along with many others, were injured or even worse, killed. The ones that survived now have ancestors that live regular lives like us. Some live on reservations.
Sioux food. The Sioux were hunters and gatherers. They hunted buffalo, deer, and other animals, too. They gathered fruits and vegetables in the wild. Some Sioux also grew crops. The three sisters, maize, squash, and beans, were important crops. They also grew pumpkins. Food was often traded between the various tribes. Sioux women made jerky by drying buffalo meat. First, they hammered the meat into powder. They mixed that with animal fat and let the mix dry. If jerky was made correctly, it stayed safe to eat for 2 years. The Sioux were very clever in the way that they provided for their families and themselves.
Sioux habitat. The Sioux Indians lived on the plains. The plains was an area of grassland with multiple grasses and flowers. The American bison was the main animal that lived there. There were also lots of animals on the plains. There were American bison, pronghorn, prairie dogs, and many more. When more and more people came to the plains, the number of buffalo became lower. The pronghorn whatsoever stayed the same. Lots and lots of plants grew on the plains, which was quite useful to the Sioux Indians. They include some regular grasses, some shrubs known as the mesquite and the sagebrush shrubs, and many others. One very interesting one was the prickly pear cactus. The Sioux had a great life in the Great Plains, partly because of all the plants, animals, and other resources. It was probably tricky, but they did it. Imagine life on the plains as a Sioux Indian.
Sioux homes. The Sioux tribes mainly lived in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North and South Dakota. They also lived in central Canada. When they traveled, they sometimes went to Illinois and a few other places. They moved around a lot so they could hunt buffalo in different areas. The Sioux lived in teepees because they were designed to be taken down and moved quickly. Actually, an entire village could be packed up and ready to move in an hour.
Ready to go.
It was probably pretty interesting living in a teepee. They were bigger and different than the average tent. There was enough room for a whole family inside. It was also different from the average tent because the walls were made of buffalo hide. 12-foot poles were used to support the teepee. There were about 18 of them. There was first a tripod with 3 poles tied together and put the other ones in the spaces between them. They would use wooden pins to fasten it. Smoke flops would be put on the top of the teepee so that smoke from their fires and heated stones went up and out the top. Those ways of heating were meant to keep the teepee warmer in the winter. Of course, fires were used to cook the food, too. The buffalo's hide thickness kept the temperature under control. In the summer, the inside of the teepee was cool, and in the winter, it was warm. Their beds were made of buffalo hides, and so were their blankets. Lots of stuff was hung on the wall inside the teepee. So objects could be simply taken off and ready to use, like a medicine bag, a quiver with arrows, a wooden bow, and a shield, and maybe a few other things. They even had backrests, which was a chair-like design. They leaned off the wall of the teepee, so you rested your back on it. Living in a teepee sounds pretty comfortable, but not stuffy. The life of a Sioux Indian sounds pretty interesting.
Sioux tools and weapons. The Sioux used many tools and weapons. One was a bone flesher. It was a tool for scraping buffalo hide. The Sioux used a bow and arrow to hunt buffalo. The horns of the buffalo were used as spoons, cups, and toys.
The Sioux used spears that were carved out of wood and rock. The spears were used at war and used to hunt. Clubs were also a useful weapon to use at war. The Sioux axe was made of chert and ashwood. The Sioux used bones to make awls. Awls were used to make holes in clothing.